Hey, Jackin.
Hi there.
Hey, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
Good, good. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right. So it's been a while since I've used this. Let me see. All right.
Hello, everybody.
Hey, Luis.
Hi.
How's it going?
Pretty good, pretty good. How are you guys?
Pretty good.
Good.
Can you guys
Good.
see this? Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. I realized this morning that I had the time zone settings wrong when I made the Wix event. So I hope that didn't trip anybody up.
Well, good thing you caught it.
I hopefully caught it for most people.
Yeah, actually, I thought it was at 5 o'clock today until you sent that email.
Oh, geez. Sorry, give me 1 second. You guys got the script? It'll look okay?
Yep, looks good.
All right.
Yeah, made a couple edits just like for my own sake, but yeah, it looks fine. Didn't really change anything.
Awesome. No, I just, yeah, added it as a guide. Feel free to change it however you need.
Do you know how many people registered?
Sorry?
Do you know how many people registered?
40, 41.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so pretty good turnout. We have another event on Thursday. This is the one with the mayor of the city of West Hollywood. That one only has 17 people. So I'm a little bit, I hope more people sign up for that one.
Oh,
There's still a couple days left for that one, so hopefully.
Yeah,
yeah.
need to do like some sort of social media blast or something.
Should also tell everyone at this event too. Do you have a reminder?
Yeah, I think at the end we can do that. Just flag it for everybody. Maybe I'll put the flyer up at the end so people can screenshot it if they need it.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
So please remind me if I forget at the end to do that.
Will do.
I'll just put it at the end of my script.
Yeah, it's added to the script.
All right, and just so you guys know, I'll go quickly through the slideshow so you know what it looks like. I only have a few slides here, but just so you know what we're using the script for. And then I think on this slide, this is when you can pass it over to me, Luis, and I'll
Okay.
ask them to introduce themselves.
Okay. Sounds good.
Oh, and then a picture at the end. Hopefully everybody stays for it. Yeah.
You're still at the office?
Yeah, I'll probably, I had a meeting right before this, so
Okay.
otherwise I would have gone home and just did this thing at home, but not enough time today.
Yeah, I also ended up having a meeting right before, but I was at home already, so
It worked out. Is it already recording? Did anybody hit record?
looks like it's recording.
Okay. Got it. Okay, that's fine. How was everyone's weekend?
Kind of nice. It wasn't too hot. It was actually kind of weird for it to be chilly.
It was actually. I went out with my girlfriend on Saturday, and we went to an outdoor place, and we just left early because she was freezing.
Yeah, it almost looked like it was gonna rain,
Yeah.
and I'm glad it wasn't because we're in the middle of a re-roof.
Uh-huh.
Fortunately, they managed to finish it Friday night, but it looked like it was gonna pour any second.
It did. It did.
Did it rain for you guys today?
It just sprinkled a little bit for us.
Was it sprinkling yesterday?
For
For me
today,
last
it
night,
was-
a little bit.
I think it was raining a little bit for us today.
Ah.
Yeah, we got just enough water coming down for it to be noticeable where I live,
Hmm.
but not much to actually do anything. So it looks like we have Nadine in the waiting room.
I'll let her in. Hey, Nadine.
Hi, how's it going?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Good. I guess
Good.
you want my camera on.
That would be good. You
Don't
don't
worry, I'll
mind.
sit back. It's a little bit, my camera is kind of close, so sorry.
Oh, no worries.
I should sit back here, I think.
Looks perfect. Nadine, we have Luis and Jacqueline on the line. They're going to be our co-hosts for the night. And everybody, this is Nadine from Metro.
Hi,
Good, nice to
hi
meet
guys.
you.
Hi there. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
So do I need to make her a co-host, Luis or Jacqueline?
So she
Should I make everybody speaking a co-host?
maybe just in case.
Yeah, okay.
I didn't know you could have multiple co-hosts.
Yeah, I didn't know that until tonight, actually. This is my second time running a Zoom conference.
It's okay, we're all learning, right?
Yep.
It just gets better and better. It's fine.
Yeah, I only use Teams at work, so Zoom is always so foreign to me.
Yeah, we always use Teams as well.
And
Yeah,
I hate Teams.
I
Teams
know,
is becoming
my computer bombs out on Teams sometimes.
yeah, mine too. It's terrible.
Yeah,
We like it
doesn't-
just because everything's like centralized and you just
Mhm.
when to have a meeting, you just start it and everybody just joins in. No need to
Yeah.
like schedule and
Yeah. Hey, Julia.
Hi. Okay.
Hi, Julia.
Hi. Can you guys hear me?
We can.
Yes, we can.
Hello.
Thanks
you
for
see?
joining us. Looks great.
Okay. I can't see myself. That's weird.
Oh.
Oh, you can't.
We can see you.
Okay.
Oh,
Is it because there's the screen up?
Oh
Ma-
yeah. Because
yeah, probably.
I had to pull
Nadine,
up
can
the
you
little
see
extra
yourself?
thing there. There we go.
The screen's going to go down during the panel discussion anyway. It's just for mostly the introduction and then the Q&A.
Will it go into gallery mode or something?
Yeah, I think there's an option where you can see both.
Yeah, I'm in gallery mode right now. I'm not sure if you can make it like
Oh, I
default for
see, okay.
everybody.
All right, cool.
So we're just waiting on Alfonso. Let me text him to make sure he's jumping on.
So the other day, Aaron Weinstein came into the office, and it's like, it's really funny to see somebody in their full, you know, as their full person, because I'm so used to seeing people only like their head or their
Yeah.
upper body. You know, it's like, it's a weird thing because you're like, oh, you're taller than I thought.
Had you met him in person before? Like
I had met him in person, but it had been a while, you know, and I was sitting down when I met him because it was in the interview. And so I didn't remember him being tall. And he's not like super tall, but just tall enough that I noticed that he was taller than I thought.
yeah.
I
Oh, I
heard,
met one of our new board members, Mayor Sandoval, in person when we did the press conference.
Oh,
And I
yeah.
was like, oh my God, you're so tall.
Yeah, he's quite tall.
Yeah.
It's a funny thing.
There's Alfonso. Let me admit him in. All right. All right. Hey, Alfonso.
Hi, Alfonso.
Alfonso, can you hear us?
Seems like he can. I think.
Yes, I can hear you. Sorry. Hi, everyone. I
Oh,
had
there
to
we
do the
go.
Gallery
We can hear
view.
you.
Okay, great.
Hey, Alfonso. Thanks for joining, everybody. So I see people starting to stream into the waiting room. So I'm going to admit them in a second. But thank you all again for joining us today. I think everybody's really excited about this one. Luis and Jacqueline are on the line. They're going to be my co-hosts for the night. So if you have any questions, feel free to send us a chat or you could text me. One thing I did want to ask, during the Q&A section, I think we try to make it a practice to have some questions ready in case the audience doesn't have any questions themselves or if they're slow to start asking questions. So Nadine, Julia, or Alfonso, if you have any questions that you want to ask of another panelist, I think that would be an interesting way to get the juices flowing. So if you think of any and want to reserve them till the end, I think that would make a really good way to start out the Q&A session. But hopefully, we don't have to do that. Unless there's a question you really want to ask them, feel free to ask that during the Q&A session. But other than that, I'm going to go ahead and start admitting everybody, and we'll start at 6:05.
Okay.
Great.
Do you want me to remove the waiting room?
Yes, please.
You know if there's a way for us to see participants as well?
Yeah, it's a good question. There should, in your gallery view, if you have access to that, you should be able to expand the window, and that way you'll be able to see everybody that's attending. Do you have that option?
Yeah, okay, I can see everyone. Thanks.
Thanks everybody for joining. We're going to get started in just 1 minute at 6:05.
Okay, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Good evening, everybody. Hope everybody is having a good day. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to our Infrastructure and Government webinar series. Today we have Influencing Infrastructure panel discussion. Our goal with this series is to hopefully provide you a better understanding of how the government is involved in shaping the built environment around us. Before we get started, I would like to everyone know that this meeting is being recorded in order to be able to share the discussion with anyone who wasn't able to make it tonight. So this series is hosted by ASCE LA YMF government chairs. My name is Luis Molina. I am one of YMF's co-chairs this year, along with my colleague, Martin Reyes. And we also have a special co-host this evening, Government Affairs Chair from ASCE San Diego YMF, Jacqueline. So we've partnered this evening with the San Diego chapter for tonight's event, and we'll hopefully have representation from throughout Southern California. So thank you, Jacqueline, for joining us, and for anyone else who's coming from other areas. So tonight we will have a panel discussion with 3 engineers who work at the intersection of policy and infrastructure. They all either help influence decision makers or they are themselves the decision makers. We'll learn about their careers and what they enjoy about them, and we'll get some insight into the decision-making process. So this is a brief overview of our agenda for tonight, and we'll begin with panelist introductions, a discussion, followed by Q&A, and of course, a group photo at the end. If you have any questions, there will be plenty of time for everyone to present their questions at the end. You can also feel free to type your questions in the chat, and please make sure to stay for a couple seconds at the end of the Q&A for the picture. Thank you, and I will now hand it over to Martin Reyes, our ASCE Government Affairs co-chair, who will moderate the discussion tonight.
Great, thanks, Luis. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm really excited about this panel discussion tonight. I've had the pleasure of working with the 3 panelists in, almost on a daily basis, I would say. So I know I could speak to their experience and their knowledge in the work that they do. We have on the slide the 3 panelists that are joining us tonight. We have Alfonso Directo from Alliance for Community Transit, ACT-LA, Julia Salinas from the Office of LA Mayor Eric Garcetti, and Nadine Lee from LA Metro. So I wanted to start off by giving each of the panelists a chance to introduce themselves. I think it would be helpful if all the panelists could just go over their current jobs, maybe a little bit about themselves, where you grew up, your education, your favorite things, and let's go ahead and get started, maybe with Alfonso, followed by Julia and Nadine.
Sounds good. Thank you all for inviting me to attend. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Alfonso Directo. I'm the advocacy manager at Alliance for Community Transit Los Angeles, or ACT-LA. ACT-LA is a 41-member organization that advocates for equity in housing and transit, and jobs. I lead the policy research and advocacy efforts for ACT-LA and support the organization's equitable development and housing work as well. So I grew up in a working class Filipino American family in Long Beach and Irvine, California. So here in Southern California. I earned a bachelor's in civil engineering from UCI with a minor in urban planning, and then urban planning master's at UCLA more recently. So I worked for about 10 years after undergrad as a design engineer and project manager on transit public works projects. And I now advocate for public transit and housing advocacy in LA. So I live here in LA with my wife and our 2 lively young toddler children. Thanks.
Thanks, Alfonso. Julia, do you want to go next?
Sure. So my name is Julia Salinas, and I work for Mayor Eric Garcetti as one of the members of his policy team for transportation. The mayor has about 200 staff people, all for the various parts of policy, overseeing both the city and for the special role that the mayor holds on Metro Board. So the Metro Board is kind of the only capacity in which the mayor is still a legislator. Because he, came from being a council member, being on city council, but now as mayor, he's primarily an executive. The role that the mayor has with Metro is unique among the portfolio of policy that he works in. So, our job is to basically, review information, prepare information, package it up for the mayor to make decisions from, and just to help frame and oversee all of the work that LADOT and Metro does that touches the city of Los Angeles. We have, to my great delight, the policy framework of working in transportation through the lens of environmentalism, which is basically what brought me into transportation. I've been working for the mayor for a couple of years. Before that, I spent the better part of a decade at Metro, worked with Nadine and got to know Alfonso a little bit there too. And prior to that, I worked as a civil engineer, not as long as Alfonso. I think I made up my mind a little bit quicker that I didn't want to be doing that for very long. But I was educated at Berkeley, worked in the Bay for some smaller firms, mostly doing land development and water resources, and figured out kind of in the early part of my career that I wanted to get closer to that decision-making process. And that's what brought me here today. I'll pass it on to Nadine.
Okay, thanks, Julia. So hi, everybody. I'm Nadine Lee. I'm the Chief of Staff at LA Metro. And yes, I'm an engineer by education and some practice. But currently my role, everybody asks me what a Chief of Staff does. And in a nutshell, what I tell everybody is that the Chief of Staff is here to remove obstacles so that work can get done. And that pretty much means I have to be a jack of all trades and a master of none. So that's that's what I do best. And I don't necessarily encourage everybody to do that, but it is kind of a fun job because every day brings a different challenge. So I did start out actually as a highway design engineer back in 1992, probably before most of you guys were born. But I've spent a good number of years doing true civil engineering work, always on transportation projects. I spent 6 years doing roadways and highways, and then moved over to do transit work, mainly light rail construction. And then when I moved over to the the public sector, I got to work on a bus project and a BRT project. So that was really exciting for me because I think all of that work set a foundation for where I am today. When I moved to Los Angeles, I moved here to join the Office of Extraordinary Innovation at Metro, which was really exciting. We can talk a little bit more about those moves later, but the whole gist of it is that, you know, I've dabbled in a lot of different things throughout my career, and it's all kind of added up to coming to Metro coming into the Chief of Staff role and getting to do a little bit of everything now. So it's really exciting. I really enjoy it. And I think we were supposed to talk about some of the things we like about LA or something personal. So just something personal that a lot of people know about me is I love to do ballet. I'm terrible at it, but it doesn't matter because I love it. And I spend a lot of time doing it, and it is the one thing that I selfishly do for myself.
Thanks, Nadine. And Alfonso or Julia, if you want to sprinkle anything in about yourselves during your next few answers, feel free. But I really appreciate all of you being here. I know everybody's really excited to hear from you. Alfonso, maybe we could start with you. I know you briefly touched on it, but do you mind sharing a little bit of your background and how you landed into the role that you have now, how you made that transition?
Yeah, sure. So I think from a young age, I think I was just really interested in how systems worked. So I think that's kind of a common thread that carries through even from what I did before, what I do now to what I do now. So a sustained interest in sort of how systems work, but the potential impact of that scale and the point at which like my work was plugging in has somewhat shifted. So when I was working as a civil engineer and project management, I was working on a single project at a time. And so now I'm working on with all of you, I'm working on projects like on a scale that's more policy level. So policies that shape the projects and the outcomes for writers and residents. So in my previous role as a civil engineer, I really had an awesome opportunity to work on some exciting projects. So in Denver, I moved to Denver for a little bit. I worked on Eagle P3 out there, a really neat P3 project. Moved down to San Diego and worked on the Midcoast Trolley project, working with Sandag. And so these experiences sort of exposed me to the routine practices of the profession. So, I did cost estimating, design plans, wrote specifications, developed reports. And then what I think I really learned was like, what goes into each stage of design, what's a 5%, what's a 30%, 60%, 90, 100%, and what that really means like in the project development cycle. But what I began to realize, however, was that like the incentives working on it in an engineering firm in particular didn't always jive with what I was feeling like needed to happen in my gut for residents and writers to like materially benefit from the public works investment. I was just not at the right stage. And so I felt the urge to move upstream into like more policy making, as we're talking about here. At the same time, like I started thinking more deeply around like my personal and professional background and growing up in a middle-class family. And I became more knowledgeable about sort of repressive systems that scattered communities across regions, which we'll talk more about later, and just sort of my feelings of solidarity with these ongoing social justice struggles. So that prompted me to do a lot of reading and personal reflection and shifted me more upstream. I went to UCLA, where I got to get a better sense of the language of planning and policy, met Martin there, and I interned with Councilmember Mike Bonin, and that gave me sort of that sense of political landscape of LA that I was really missing, like being just an engineer, not just, but being an engineer at a firm. So, through that office, I met a lot of the social justice advocates I worked with. I worked with Investing in Place, which is a policy advocacy nonprofit for a bit. And then I developed my community relationships through outside of the workday, through volunteering and leading groups at LA Forward, which is another local nonprofit. And then now, as I mentioned before, I work with ACT LA. And so I work with numerous organizations at once on our campaigns for Metro as a Sanctuary, which is our divest from police, invest in community solutions work, Fare Free Transit, and Better Bus work. So yeah, that's how I transitioned.
Thanks, Alfonso. Julia, similar question to you. I think the job that you have right now is a little bit different from the job a civil engineer typically takes on. So can you describe how you got into this role and its relation to the roles that you've had in the past?
Yes, yeah. So, I mean, this is an interesting panel because it's really unusual to have people who have educations as both an engineer and a planner. And we've got, a couple of them in this group. So my career began as a traditional, or I graduated as a traditional engineer, but basically the first job I had out of college was not normal. I worked for like a boutique engineering firm in San Francisco straight out of college, like, early 2000s. And it was a couple of years before the crash, and we were doing a lot of high-end development. We had all of the money to go play with, a lot of high-end clients to do very sustainable, cutting-edge stuff. We would just make up the rules if we didn't have any, because the clients could afford that. So it was very exciting and it was very creative. We got to work with some international developers. Of course, the projects that we were working on were for extremely wealthy people. They were, basically resort developments or, vacation homes and things like that a lot of the time, or very large properties around the Bay Area. But it was I liked that part of it, of being able to frame everything that we did through sustainability. That was always the edge that we got to push. We were inventing ways of doing water recycling for residents and things like that, which you could really only do if you had a residence that had that kind of budget. But then 2008 happened and everybody lost their job. And all of the development work that we had been doing at that company was funded by Lehman Brothers. So all of that went away. And the next step I took in my career, I thought I deliberately wanted to go do something very traditional because I knew that my first job was kind of wacky. And so I did. I took a water resource engineering job in the East Bay of the Bay Area and worked on a lot of Caltrans highway widening projects, doing a lot, weeks and weeks and months of drainage calcs for highways, everything for a very long time. And it was only a year and a half, but I knew pretty much right away that I did not want to be doing that job. So I took that time to apply to grad school, and I also went to UCLA. I knew that I wanted to get up, into the decision-making process, and I was looking at jobs that I wanted, and they all required planning degrees. So I said, okay, I guess the next step I'll take will be a planning degree. Did that, discovered that I really liked it. I liked the policy stuff that they teach you in planning school. And that, I think, is also where I started to be aware of the political forces that shape what we do. I think in taking Brian Taylor's transportation finance class, I think my mind was blown when I was like, oh my God, this is why we build what we build. It's not because it's always the right thing to do right then. It's because we passed a ballot measure 10, 15 years ago, and it's on the list. And so it's time to build it now. And that's still a lot of the stuff that we deal with day to day. And then starting in LA, I worked on a lot of, I think, interdisciplinary stuff when I was a staff member at Metro. Basically, I was a project manager in fare collection and in planning. And I think the role that I ended up having a lot of the time, because I could speak engineer and planner, was getting technical people and non-technical people to talk to each other. And that's still the role that I play a lot today, is, playing that translator role. A lot of times, what I do right now is talking with the city of LA engineers who are approving plans and Metro project managers, and trying to get these, hundreds of millions of dollars of project working better and flowing through and not hitting delays. And a lot of it is just communication between engineers and planners, or just engineers and non-engineers. So the background still serves me well. I can still understand what's going on, but for me personally, I'm very, I need to be closer to that policy and understanding why we do the things that we do. And I found that in my career, that's not always what an engineer's work is. So that's my story. Thanks,
Julia. And Nadine, in your role as chief of staff, I think you do a lot of things that, as a young engineer, you probably wouldn't anticipate doing. I know you work with a lot of different teams at Metro. You work with people in construction and finance, but also safety and security, housing and homelessness, and all sorts of things. So did you ever see yourself doing this when you were younger? And how did you make that transition into the work that you're doing now?
That's a great question, because I can, since I'm, I think, a lot older than everybody else here on the call or on the webinar, I can tell you that when I was coming up through the ranks, I was not actually thinking about, where I wanted to go with my career, and certainly didn't consciously make that connection between planning and policy and the engineering work that I was doing. I think my perspective on that evolved over time. I had a really wonderful opportunity in 2009 to do an international transit study mission to Southeast Asia, where we looked at performance measurement as it relates to improving operations and ultimately the customer experience. And I think that sort of blew my mind, because I realized that you could actually pull together all these different facets of what we do with transportation, and you could, actually set targets on how you wanted to perform better. And so that kind of helped sort of formulate in my mind that there was something bigger that I could be doing with all my skills. And so I started to really think about the connection between transportation and all these other sort of forces in our communities and in our lives, things like, energy use and the environment and the economy and healthcare and, general access, and how transportation could actually transform people's lives for the better. And so even though I didn't consciously think of it when I was a younger engineer, all of those things started to form in my head, about a little over 10 years ago. And I really started to be much more intentional about pursuing jobs that would allow me to exercise that creativity. Certainly very hard to do in the public sector, but when I saw the job description come up for the Office of Extraordinary Innovation, I thought, wow, this could be a really great opportunity to sort of break out of the traditional engineering mode and to really try to do something that would shape, not just shape what we're doing in our day-to-day engineering work, but to really change people's lives. And so that was the impetus for really, moving in a different direction. And we can talk a little bit more, I think, in some of the subsequent questions that you might have for us. We can talk a little bit more about how we do that individually. How do you curate your future and your career path?
Thanks, Nadine. And I think you all touched on something that's going to be a recurring theme in this panel discussion, in that engineering and infrastructure is part of a bigger picture that I think you all sort of acknowledge and keep in mind when you're doing the work that you do. Before we get into the meat of our discussion, I wanted to ask a quick basic question. And it's a really important one, I think, but all the careers that you have right now, it sounded like they were intentionally decided on. You were very intentional about pursuing the careers that you're pursuing now. Do you like your jobs? What do you like about them, if you do, and what motivates you to do a good job while you're doing it? We could start off with anybody here, maybe Nadine, since we started with Alfonso, we'll go back the other way around. Do you want to start us off?
Well, so depending on the day, I like my job. So I mean, yes, I actually love my job. And I think I probably put that into my performance evaluation every year when I get to make my contribution to my evaluation, as I tell Phil Washington how much I love my work. And, just because I need to record that, but I do, I love what I do. And part of the reason I love what I do is because it really aligns with what I care about. I spend a lot of time thinking about how my work can impact people's lives in a very positive way. And, I know there's a lot of talk in younger generations about, what is your brand and that sort of thing. And my brand, I guess, if I was to say what my brand was or is, my brand is really, using my knowledge to help improve communities and help improve people's lives. And so, I think that, that is what drives me. And I think having that alignment with what I actually do from day to day really helps me stay focused. And it helps me get through the hard times, because as you all know, every single one of you knows because you work with me, we don't always agree on things. And sometimes making the sausage is very messy. And so it's a thankless job on all sides very often. But you have to have that sort of guidepost and that North Star to keep you going. And for me, that's the impact to people's lives. I really think about when I ended my job in Colorado and literally got on a plane the next day and was headed to LA. I was flying into LA at night and took a picture of all the lights from the plane at nighttime. And I thought to myself, I'm here to improve 10 million people's lives. That's what I'm here for. And it was kind of cool to be able to say that and to feel strongly about it. So, that's what keeps me going.
Thanks, Nadine. Alfonso, Julia, either of you want to join in and explain what you like about your jobs?
Sure, I can go next. I also very much like my job. I wasn't sure if I would like my job when I took it, and turns out I do, because I came from basically doing, at the time that I left my position at Metro, I was a project manager that was basically doing the traditional planning stuff of putting a project through environmental clearance, which takes years. It takes, a long time with some patience. It's the long game. And I was working on a project I loved, talking about brand. I mean, I basically was that project. I was the river path. I was the project manager for what I like to call, it's the largest active transportation project in the Americas. It's basically going to be a $500 million project to put a bike path down 8 miles of the LA River. And I loved it. But I was really frustrated by, not being able to work on problems as I came across them in working through my project. I would, come across something and then be like, look, there's this broken thing. Can we fix it? But that wasn't my job. And so, no, I couldn't work on that. So I really like being able to work in the mayor's office because that is my job now. Similar to Nadine, our job as the staff people, the mayor tells people, I'm here to remove your obstacles, and we're the people who go move all the dirt. We go dig the holes and, pull out the backhoes and move all the things around so that people can do the work in an easier way. And I very much enjoy that. I like being able to bring people together, to connect the dots, working across silos, figuring out that, people are actually working towards the same thing and helping them understand that. That's what I get really excited about. And of course, like I said in the beginning, I'm just, what motivates me is making this region more sustainable. I mean, I grew up in Southern California. I grew up in West LA and in Ventura County. My mom was a super commuter for a really long time, and it was terrible, seeing hours and hours and hours, and my friends' parents too, all through high school growing up. People would be in the car for hours every day, and it's just terrible. And so being able to, directly improve people's lives, like Nadine was saying, that is what really gets me. And then also, aside from super commuters, just, being able to, lessen environmental burden, like the 710, like we've got basically the worst corridor for pollution burden in the whole country right here. We can make that better. And being able to actually do things that make those things better, make people's lives safer, make it safer to walk to the store, to walk your children to school. That's what gets me going. And, I also enjoy, I'm the type of person where I want to know how the sausage is made. So I like being closer, even if I don't like the outcome. I'd rather know. I'd rather see it done and understand and just go, okay, I get it. I can accept it. But for me, given the answer of just like, well, that's just politics, this is just what we have to do, that was not satisfactory for me. So being able to see how the decision was made, even if I don't like it, really helps me continue the motivation in my job, rather than just being like, well, I don't know why we're doing what we're doing, so it's hard for me to keep going, but I like this place. Alfonso.
Thank you. I love my job as well. I think what motivates me is what I kind of mentioned to you earlier in the top with my intro, which is like that feeling of solidarity with folks. And a lot of the work I do on a day-to-day basis is meeting with community organizers, community members who are, facing like the confusion of like, is Metro free right now? Is it not? Is it like, how do I make this happen? Like, how can I, get enrolled in this, or who's facing like tremendous, pressure with mounting debt over the course of this pandemic. And I think that, just like I mentioned earlier, like my working class root family, like my dad still works, at LAX, on the tarmac, and like I get that sense of solidarity working with community members here throughout LA who are, facing like those like super commutes as well, like Julia was talking about. So I think just having a daily sort of grounding in what it is that I think could materially like improve the lives of people who are riding transit today and the most impacted current residents by this pandemic have motivated me in this job, and seeing the elation that comes from wins, small or large, but wins that come through policy when folks are advocating for that is rewarding. So yeah.
Thanks, Alfonso. And on the topic of making sausages, I think as engineers, that's a lot of, the work that engineers do, right? Is you're responsible for, seeing the sausage making process through. So a question for all three of you. Do you think your engineering experience has influenced the way you do your job? Has it affected the way you approach problems at all? Alfonso, maybe we could start with you.
Yeah, yeah. I think it, like I said earlier, like I think about things systematically. And I think that has aided sort of my job now because, I recognize that what problem we may be facing at a particular moment, like has a genesis in like a larger, oftentimes has a genesis in a larger arc. And, I find it, personally, I feel like it's my privilege to be able and responsibility to be able to break that down, for break that problem down for folks who are experiencing like that challenge right now. And so it causes me to, continually have to shift my thinking from different perspectives, which is the challenge, but is I think something a lot of us here do. And so, yeah, so my, for example, like my, engineering experience and talking to that informally with my family, that allowed me to sort of articulate, the impact of my work at an earlier age. And then, my conversation with contractors, it helped me, show how that was done. One second, I have a child. And I'll pass it on to Julia for now, or somebody else for now, sorry.
No problem, dad duty. So for me, the background of engineering, I notice it every day because I work with a bunch of non-engineers. And so like, when we're confronted with a problem every day, like my reaction is often different from my colleagues who are, they come from whatever, philosophy, political science, communications, whatever. And so I'm the only like technically trained person on my team. And so like a lot of the time I can't help it. I'm still an engineer at heart. It's ingrained in there, as much as I appreciate all of the policy stuff and love to dive into that. Sometimes my reaction is still an engineer's where I'm like, incredulous that we're doing something that's not the logical answer, and, I know logically why that's not happening, but that's always my first reaction is just like, oh, I can't believe that's not happening. Of course, this is the thing that we should be doing. The literature says blah, blah, blah. And, that's not the world we live in. We don't always get to do the logical thing. And that's why I do appreciate my job, because I get to understand why. But yeah, every day I notice that that my understanding of the world is different from somebody who is not trained as an engineer. So I'll pass it back to you, Alfonso, if you wanted to finish that thought.
Yeah, thanks. It's exactly that. It's just that, not everybody thinks like an engineer, and for better or for worse. And and I think that just, forces all of us to, be able to shift our phrasing and our thinking to be able to communicate with others. And I was just going to say, like with contractors, like as I was developing design plans, like that was one of like the earlier moments where I was like, I really have to like reframe, reapproach this differently, because contractors just want to get something in the ground. And so like, it doesn't require all this process that engineers are taught to know and produce. And so, breaking things down with, the design builders on P3, on Eagle P3, and then in San Diego again, was just like really exciting, and also like reframing. And then nowadays, working with local residents and writers who really don't care about the process and just want transit to work for them. That's also another audience that I'm having to shift my framework with. But, again, like it grounds me in that struggle that they're facing and wanting to sort of improve their lives materially as well.
Thanks. Nadine, you want to go next?
Yeah, well, I think at a broader level, engineers are problem solvers, and creative ones, despite what people might think stereotypically of engineers. We are quite creative, because I think about, on a construction site, if there is a design change that's needed, engineers are on it, right? They figure out how to fix something in real time. And so there's a sense of urgency around our problem solving abilities. And if you apply that to everything that we're doing, either at the policy level or at the construction level, we're actually very well equipped to pivot or to react or to adapt to something that is presenting themselves before us. And I think that is a real skill that perhaps is unappreciated by a lot of people, but I think it's also what makes us, so effective. And so I think that, absolutely, being an engineer has affected everything that I do. And a lot of people, working with me and probably with Julia and Alfonso probably don't even know we're engineers, but they're always a little surprised when we ask that, that real stickler of a question, that really gets at the heart of what the problem is, because we can dissect issues quickly and figure out what's really at the root of the problem. And so I have to say, it's kind of fun to surprise people sometimes.
Thanks, Nadine. And I would have to agree. I think you're all in the positions you are because you're problem solvers at the end of the day, and really in your roles that you take on every day, that's what you're doing. So thank you all for your answers. Julia, I have a question for you. Since you work for Mayor Garcetti, it kind of goes without saying that you work in a really political environment. And the decisions that you and your office makes affect 4 million people across the entire city and more when you're talking about Metro. So can you explain what does the decision-making process looks like for you and in your role when it comes to infrastructure? And can you share what kind of factors that your office considers when you're actually about to make a decision?
Sure. So, I think along the lines of what Nadine was just saying, the way that I had to make sense of how we as policy makers and policy implementers do our work is I basically had to figure out the workflow. It always takes us a while to learn how to do our jobs, right? And so when I was trying to figure out how to do this job when I first started, I was stuck where I would read, a board report for Metro or something, and then I would go to my colleagues and be like, okay, this is what it says. And then they were like, okay, and then, and I'm like, well, I don't know, then what, But I had to learn the then what, which is to make a decision. So basically everything we do is if we're presented with a problem, we look at, okay, what is our existing policy? Do we have one? Usually we do, unless it's a totally wacky new thing. But usually what we'll do is okay, there's an issue about buses or something. And we'll go back and look at okay, what is the established policy that the administration already has? Match it up to kind of where that fits in, and then look at okay, do we need to adjust anything? What's going to be impacted? How can this actually be implemented? Because sometimes even if we're in the decision-making position, we're not in the actionable position. And that happens at the city where, we've got the division between executive and legislative branch. So this happens with something like Vision Zero. The mayor can set a policy of working towards 0 deaths. He does not have the power to implement it because it's within the power of each of the districts. All of the 15 districts have the power to either do a project or not within their district. And so that is how we have to shape the policy. So who do we need to bring along with us is usually the next step in, okay, we need to make a decision. Who needs to come along? Who needs to be a part of this process so that it can be successful? And then setting it off within its path within a department. Should this policy be implemented within somewhere within Public Works or maybe DOT, or who do we need to get on board in order to make it successful? That's kind of the formula of how you work through a policy decision that I had to learn on the job. They did not teach that to me in school. And, often there's political things that I had to learn along the way too of, oh, okay, this person hates that policy topic. So we need to figure out a way to find something that they can like about it. And maybe it's not the first thing, but maybe it's the second or third thing that they can get behind. Or maybe it's just a flat out transactional trade. Maybe they hate everything about it, but they're willing to stomach it if you do something else that they want. That's all a part of our daily job in this position, which I'm sure you have experience with too, also serving an elected office.
Thanks, Julia. And I appreciate you giving us some insight into the city's decision-making process, which I'm sure eludes many people, myself included. So thank you for your answer. Nadine, in your role of chief of staff, I mentioned that you work with all sorts of people. You work with the engineers and planners, but also even the bus operators and the law enforcement that Metro has on staff. Most importantly, you work with the public in general, and I think that's your most important collaborator, right? So how do you incorporate public opinion into the decision-making process at Metro, and how are the needs of constituents captured to ensure that the right decisions are being made?
So I will say that it's an evolution. I'm kind of embarrassed to say that because at the heart of everything that we do, we're doing things for the people, right? But I think somewhere along the way, transit, sometimes government, we've sort of forgotten who we work for. If you were to ask anybody within Metro as an 11,000 person organization who they work for, they might say Phil Washington, they might say the board, but very few of them will say, I work for the people of LA County. I work for the citizens. I work for the people who pay the taxes, and really, truly, that is who we work for. And so, trying to change the culture and the mindset within Metro institutionally, I think is challenging. We've started to do that through the work that we did on the Vision 2028 strategic plan that was adopted, 3 years ago now. And we tried to sort of set that foundation for, who are we really trying to do all of our work for? And that includes the infrastructure projects, the operations, the contracts that we're implementing. Everything that we do is really to make transportation work for people. And so it's, like I said, an evolution, because it's going to take a long time for us to really change that mindset. I sort of have this joke that everything that we do at Metro is designed to make Metro's life easier. and when I say that, I mean that, when we look at the operation of our transit system, everything's about how do we make the numbers work, and how do we match the capacity of our system to the ridership that we have at any given time, knowing that those things fluctuate. Instead of saying, let's put out the level of service that people want to take, or that'll make their lives easier, so they're not waiting around in hot sun and it's not so unpredictable when the bus is going to come by. Let's design a system that actually works for people and not worry about whether we're carrying 5 people on a bus or 50 people on a bus. Let's figure out how we deliver a mobility system that's going to get people where they want to go really conveniently, and make it work well for them. And if we think about it from the customer's perspective, then we actually can produce a product that they want to buy. And that's sort of a fundamental thing. And so, I think your question may have been a little bit more focused around, how do we engage the community and things like that. But I feel like we need to start with the people who are riding our system right now and make it work well for them and design the system for them. And obviously include the community in the development of future expansion projects and future services that we're going to provide. But at the heart of it, I think we need to actually provide services that work for people today.
Thanks, Nadine. And I think that's an important thing to, for everyone to keep in mind if you work in transportation, right? Transportation is something that's supposed to connect people, could connect people with one another, could connect them with their workplace or maybe their schools or anything else really. But at the end of the day, it's a service that we provide for people. And, Alfonso, that's sort of a good segue into a question that I have for you. I think historically, transportation has been something that's connected us, but in a lot of ways, it's also something that has disconnected other people. And you could see it in a lot of LA's landscape and architecture and East Side communities, for example, like Boyle Heights. There are multiple freeways, running through the community, and there are actual, specific reasons for things like that happening. And I think civil engineers, good and bad, are responsible for a lot of it. So my question for you is, in your opinion, how inclusive is the decision-making process in general when it comes to transportation in LA? And is it any better than what we've seen in the past?
Thanks for this question. This is a tough one, but I'll do my best to address. The engineering field's power to connect, but also divide is really astounding. Our profession's power to connect in part is what like motivated me to pursue this career. But then that deepening knowledge of the profession's power to divide and destroy communities really stunned me at first. And it now motivates my work to get rid of those divisive policies and institutionalize inclusive ones. So, I'm talking about the racist mindsets that civil engineers of the 20th century held and they perpetuated in segregating people by race in our cities. These mindsets, have become baked into the automobile-centric design standards and zoning laws that we all work with. And so typical decision-making processes in transportation, in my honest opinion, have a way to go to be characterized as inclusive. Some criteria that I base this kind of on is just on access and authentic levels of influence. Accessibility for everyday workers like transit riders, working class folks, Black people, Indigenous people, people of color who depend on public transportation. That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about authentic influence that uplifts and centers their experiences in investments now going forward. So I think about how these people's lived experiences or our lived experiences for those of us in these communities, like how can that lead policymaking and project development in as direct a way as possible? So I'm talking, yes, to in-language meetings, language that are multilingual, of course, and to materials that are in simple vocabulary that is just approachable to everyday people. I'm talking about meeting times that work for directly impacted folks. That's part of it as well. And I'm talking about eliminating enrollment and requirements for participation that, if you believe, as many do, that public transit is a public good, it's just as basic as possible as just getting on a transit system, on a transit vehicle. Yeah, I'm talking about centering the lives of the, lived experience of the families of color who are trying to stay situated in their homes as realtors are investing, where they see transit being in, investments going in, and they see demolishing units, units next to them being demolished. Like that's happening today. So how can our approach, center these folks, how can we approach public safety to broaden our view of what public safety is? Understanding what we know now, understanding racism, right? Like that's a piece that is like so fundamental that it needs to, infuse into civil engineering language now. How can we promote reparative structures in dealing with people who are unhoused to address the root causes of poverty and trauma and stigma? We're problem solvers, as Nadine said. And I think listening to that gut about like, what is that root problem? And then pursuing that is really, I think, the key takeaway that I would say is what would make more inclusive systems.
Thanks, Alfonso, and everybody for your answers. I think that really gives everybody some insight into the decision-making process as a whole. As engineers that you work in the decision-making process, I was hoping you could share some knowledge with the engineers that we have on the conference right now. So an open question to everybody. Can you share some lessons that you've learned over your careers and how you're using those lessons in your work now? Maybe let's go backwards. Julia, do you want to start us off?
Sure. So I mean, if we're talking about career path, and I'm gonna just use that framing, but feel free to redirect me, Martin. I think we're talking about how do you know like what you work in is what you want to do and how to recognize when it's not. For me, that moment came when I was working on an EIR document for a highway widening in the Central Valley. And, I was doing, I think, a 408 analysis or something, Army Corps of Engineers. It was a wetland. And we were going to basically be wiping out part of a wetland in an area that I didn't even know had wetlands. And I was like, wow, this probably is super rare. And we're just gonna get rid of that. And, then I started looking at like, well, why are we even widening the highway? And I looked at some Google Maps, and this is like early days of Google Maps. So satellite images were, a new thing to be able to go do that. And, or not brand new, but it was, fairly new. And, I looked and I was like, there's nothing there. This was like an area outside of Bakersfield. And, we were widening the 178 and, literally the middle of nowhere, orange fields. And when I came to realize it was speculative land development, which was, basically spurring the county to spur Caltrans to widen this highway, that I was just disgusted, with my work, because, here I was just doing my little engineering calculations of like, okay, we have to put the stormwater in the places and make sure it gets treated to the right levels and whatever, and make the numbers work. Okay. I solved that problem, but I was working in a context that was a bigger problem. And once I figured out that that bigger problem existed, the smaller problem I didn't care about anymore, and became insignificant. And I think that's kind of what we're all talking about is, as your lens gets bigger throughout your career, that I think it's okay to maybe stray from the engineering for a little bit if you are forced to have a smaller lens by doing the actual engineering work of design. But there still are plenty of other things that you can do as an engineer that inform the process, that are maybe you're not solving a math problem or working on a spreadsheet, but you're still helping to design a better world. You're still helping to get there in a different way. And I think, it's still engineering to some degree if you're problem solving for the good of the people, even if it's a larger lens.
Thanks, Julia. I think that's a great point to keep in mind. I think a lot of times engineers are given assignments, and maybe sometimes there's, we don't ask the question why enough. Why are we doing this in the first place? And is it the thing that we should be doing? And if not, is there a way to address it? I think that's a great point for us to keep in mind. Nadine, Alfonso, do either one of you want to share a few lessons you've learned over your careers?
Let me add on to what you just said about asking why, because I remember distinctly in my very first job out of college, I probably was only in it, maybe a couple of years. And I remember I was asking these questions about this project I was working on. And my boss at the time said, Nadine, in your entire career, you get a chance to ask 20 questions and you've asked 25. And I thought to myself, okay, this is probably not the right job for me, because they're not willing to take the time and teach me why we're doing things. And so I definitely encourage, in terms of lessons, always be curious. I think engineers are curious by nature, as I think we've all alluded to, but we should always ask why until we're satisfied, because I think this, what Julia was talking about was contextualizing the work that we're doing and really understanding how the thing that we're doing plays a larger role, or has a larger role in, on the macro level. And I think that's important, because then you can kind of process and rationalize, the work that you're doing when you're doing calcs, or doing quantities, which I know every one of us has mentioned, and I'm pretty sure every one of us would poke our eyes out if we had to do calcs all the time. I for sure would, but I think it is important to really understand the context of everything that you're doing, because there is meaning to it. And sometimes you can shape that meaning depending on where you are in your career and how much influence you have and how much risk you're willing to take in order to change things. The other thing that I would say is that one of the most important things that I've learned through my career is that it's really important to meet somebody where they are. And that's like any of your colleagues or a stakeholder group or an elected official. You have to learn how to adapt. And sometimes as a young engineer or a young person, and even sometimes for me, I get a little bit belligerent about this and indignant, because I want people to meet me where I am. But that's never been a successful strategy for me. What I've always found is the most successful is figuring out what's making somebody else tick, and then figuring out how to bring them along. hopefully closer to where I am. But certainly trying to meet them in the middle somewhere, but starting from where they are, because otherwise I can't help solve the problem if I don't know where they're coming from. And so that adaptability is, if you're able to do it, it's truly an art. It's not something that is easily learned. But if it's something that you're naturally inclined to, capitalize on it and figure out how to use it to your advantage, obviously in a positive way. But I think it'll serve you well. And the sooner you recognize that, the more successful you're going to be.
Thanks, Nadine. I think that's a great point, and it's a great, I think, way to describe the challenges and what you have to do to get to make decisions, right? You have to meet constituents where they are to get them on board with a project. You have to meet an elected official where they are to get their support. I think that's a great analogy. Alfonso, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think the piece on context is so important, because I mean, something I realized was just technical answers are not unbiased answers, that they are rooted in some motive. And I realized I would much rather be the producer of that motive rather than putting somebody else's motive, forward, especially if it was racist. And so, nothing, I mean, I just realized the bias is inherently baked. And so requiring, understanding that context and background. And so, as a person with lots of education, I realized that I don't have all the answers. Even though I had all this privilege, you have community members whose everyday lives are taking them through the spaces that I've designed or I'm trying to influence through policy. They're the ones who are going to have to live with what it is that, we're deciding. And so how is it that I can, prioritize and uplift and center their experiences is really kind of my takeaway nowadays.
Thanks, Alfonso. Another open question to the three of you. Is there anything you wish, is there anything you know now that you wish you had known as a young engineer starting out your career? Alfonso, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Yeah, how things get built have many facets. It's not just physical. And I think that's what really enticed me about architecture at the one point, and then civil engineering afterward, was just how is it that what I can do I can see it in real life, and I could see that pretty, and that's what got me really excited about a lot of P3 and design build work, because it cut out a lot of that middle ground of developing projects that sit on shelves. So I really was into that, but there are many facets, where this can happen. Seeing that success can happen at the policy level too, when like I mentioned earlier, community members get elated when what they're asking for and feel would really help them gets passed. And I think that to me is another way of there's more ways to see something built in real life.
Thanks, Alfonso. Nadine, anything you want to share that you wish you had known as a young engineer? Not that you all aren't still young engineers. I think you know what I mean when I say that.
No, total offense taken, Martin. No, I on a personal level, I would encourage all of you to not get roped into feeling like you need to be like somebody else. Really early on in my career, I was, and it was a different time back then, but I felt, that I was getting sort of inundated with this idea that I had to follow the 7 habits of highly effective people. I'm not even sure if people know what that is anymore, but it's just this whole idea that you have to conform to a certain mold in order to be successful in life or in your career is totally not true. And it's certainly not true in LA, where I think we have the most diverse population in the entire world. I think you can be very successful if you know what your strengths are, and if you capitalize on your strengths. You got to know what your weaknesses are, but don't spend a lot of time trying to fix your weaknesses, because that's what other people are doing. That's what you delegate people to do. And so, don't waste your time on that. Spend time doing the things that you're good at, and then figure out how to fill in the holes with other staff or, other resources. But I think the most important thing that I like to tell people is that, the thing that makes you special is you. It's not you being somebody else or keeping up with the Joneses. It's that you bring a very diverse perspective and a different lived experience. And that shapes every decision that you make and every contribution that you can provide to a team. And the sooner you realize that, the sooner you'll stop hurting yourself by saying how terrible you are because you're not like somebody else. So I encourage you to remember that as you go through your career.
Thanks, Nadia. I think that's a great lesson. I remember someone once telling me that, you know, your weaknesses are something you can only incrementally improve, but your strengths can go, you know, off the charts if you just work on it. So that's a great lesson. Julia, do you want to share?
Yeah, I mean, I would second what Nadine said. You know, I think I figured out in my second engineering job that was very traditional, I figured out I was not going to be the best engineer ever. You know, I could do it, and I got bored really fast. I mean, I remember like the first couple of weeks of my job, I was just learning how to do the calcs and then would blow through them because they were boring. And then I would go to my boss and be like, okay, like what's next? Because I'm done with that. And, you know, she was like, oh my God, like, no, that's supposed to take longer. Like there's nothing else, like that's it. And, you know, I just had to like come up with ways to make it last longer because, you know, my solution was just do it as fast as possible to make it go away. Whereas there were other people that were completely content to play the puzzle game for weeks. You know, working away at this spreadsheet, making it perfect, making the model perfect, you know, like that was a really fun and rewarding game for them to play through their work. I could not get away from it fast enough. And that's okay, because it turns out that like there's a whole, you know, field of work for engineers who like to talk to humans too. And, you know, like if you're the guy who just loves to work on the spreadsheets and the puzzles for weeks on end, like chances are you're not going to love talking to the humans. And so that's okay. You know, like I came to that conclusion like over a period of years, you know, and kind of like Nadine was saying, it took me a while to be like, oh no, like that's fine. It's okay if I'm not that guy. Because I can go do something else and I can be, you know, really good at something else. I do love spreadsheets though. I use them all the time. But you know, it's the context of, you know, I wanted to know what we were working on. I wanted to know why. I wanted to, you know, understand the bigger picture. And I will say my 2 cents of, you know, now working in government and an elected office of, I wish I could tell my younger self, it is so important to understand the governance structure where you're working. And that changes no matter where you are. So, you know, the governance structure when I first started my career in the Bay Area is completely different from the Los Angeles area, even though we're in the same state. And each state is completely different and each country is different. And it really shapes how these infrastructure projects get done. So, you know, even if you don't have interest in policy, in doing the work of policy stuff, or you don't have interest in engaging in work of politics, I would just really encourage everybody, and including my younger self, to understand what goes on in your area. You know, just as an example, in Southern California, we have really decentralized governance structures, right? So we don't have state telling county telling cities what to do. We basically have county kind of saying, you should do stuff, and then, you know, hands off. Cities get to decide what they want to do a lot of the time. And that's not the way it is everywhere else. A lot of places have a more centralized system where each level of government kind of dictates down what needs to be adhered to, and each level closer to the ground is responsible for enforcing. And so that makes, you know, kind of for this wild west of a place that we still live in, you know, it was kind of made this way in the beginning and it still exists today. You know, we sometimes take a really long time, you know, to change the way we do things in Southern California because we have that decentralized system. But once we finally do decide to change, it requires consensus in order to do that. And so because we require consensus in order to make change, it can sometimes happen much quicker than it will in a different place where each level of government is hammering down on the next to force each one to change. So it's a really interesting place to be in, you know, the world of government. in Southern California. And that's just something I had no idea about when I was younger.
Thanks, Julia. And I think what would be really helpful to explain the governance issue is a really good spreadsheet laying all of that out. I'll work on that later tonight. So I think we're getting close to our time limit. I want to make sure we have enough time for Q&A. So my last question, and Julia, maybe we could start with you. Where do you see yourself going in the next 5 years with your career? Do you have any plans? I don't think Mayor Garcetti is listening right now, so you can be honest with us.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm, I have this conversation with myself like almost every day at this point. Because I currently work for a politician who is going to be terming out in less than 2 years now. Every time we have a staff meeting, we get a reminder of how many days are left. And we have been getting that reminder of how many days are left for, I think over a year before COVID. And I'm actually on loan from somewhere else. So like I might not even be there until the end. So I'm not exactly sure what the capacity that I will be serving the people in is going to be, but I know that I will be serving the people of Los Angeles. So, the way that I kind of talk myself through this is I 100% believe in the goalpost of 28, because that's, when the Olympics will be here. And it's the Olympics, and people can get excited and kind of say like, well, that's just games. Like, why should that dictate what your infrastructure development portfolio is? But it's a goal, and it helps us get everybody to work together with urgency. And I don't think there will be another time in my career where people are as motivated to work together and as motivated to have the city and county of Los Angeles be, the global welcoming place for the 28 games. Like it's just such a motivator. We're going to have just that opportunity that's what I'm looking for. So basically when people ask me, what are you going to do? For me, it's just, doing the best job that I can do as a planner, engineer, political advisor person who is steeped in Los Angeles and really motivated to make it better and a greener place, an environmentally more equitable place. So I'm not sure what it's going to hold, but it's going to be something like that.
Thanks, Julia. Alfonso, you want to go next?
Sure.
Where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Yeah, I think I've got a short answer, and then I could probably jump back to something I wanted to say earlier too, which is from 5 years, I think I see myself deepening my relationship with community members here in LA, promoting inclusive design as like the solution to a lot of some of the ills we're facing societally. And so that kind of like drives back to like some advice I wanted to just offer, was just like, if you aren't already as a young engineer or whatever, like start thinking about these things intersectionally. Like transportation, if you work in transportation, like it's connected to the housing world, it's connected to the water resources world. Like they're not silos like our profession oftentimes likes to tell us, and just that they're fundamentally linked. So so in 5 years, deepening my relationships with the wonderful people that I work with today.
Thanks, Alfonso. Nadine, do you want to close this out?
Well, sure. Let me just touch on what Alfonso just said, because I think it's really important for the audience today to understand that engineering doesn't only mean construction and infrastructure. There's a lot of work that's done by engineers that has nothing to do with pouring concrete. And so, I think about, a lot of the work that we're trying to build a better bus system here in LA County. We do need people who are managing projects, helping to push through some of the policy changes related to things like bus lanes and bus stop investments and things like that. So, engineers have the perfect mindset to try to solve those problems. And so just because you're doing civil engineering work and that's what you got educated doing, doesn't mean you have to go out there and actually build, something. I always talk about how, we don't just, go out and sorry, my light keeps going off. We don't just go out and pour concrete for the sake of pouring concrete. We're pouring concrete to actually build something for people to use. And so I think that's important for everybody to remember. In terms of where I might be in 5 years, let me give you the context of, 5 years ago, I was just arriving in LA. So, when I think about what's happening in 5 years, I really don't know where I'm going to be in 5 years. It's really hard to say. What I do know is that there are tons of opportunities, and similar to Julia, there's there are changes happening. Obviously, we're getting a new CEO here at Metro, and Phil Washington is leaving to do better things, whatever those may be. But because of the change, there are a lot of possibilities, and so I'm excited about that because I think I'm just going to find where I can be of the best use in serving people. So that's very non-committal, I know.
No, and I don't expect you all to commit a 5-year plan right now, but I appreciate, all of your answers. I think they were really great and really lend a lot of, I think, food for thought for everybody on the call. I wanted to hand the virtual mic over to Jacqueline to open up the discussion for Q&A. So Jacqueline, you want to take it over?
Yeah, thanks, Martin. Yeah, thank you, everyone, all the panelists. I thought this was a really great discussion. I learned a lot from just listening to you all. I don't really know much about the policy side, so it was just great listening to you guys. So now I want to open it up to the audience. If there's any questions, you can either raise your hand through Zoom, or you can just type directly in the chat and we can talk about it. And also feel free to ask our panelists about any subject, whether about work, or if you want to follow up on one of their previous answers, or just about advice for your career in general.
And maybe, Jacqueline, maybe while you're doing that, I have a question for my fellow panelists, which, I think I shared the moment that I realized that I was like, oh no, I can't do this in my career. And I was wondering if you guys had any of those moments in your careers.
I think I had a lot of those moments because, like I said, if I had to do quantity calcs all the time, I'd be poking my eyes out. But yeah, when I was first starting out in my career doing highway design work, I knew it wasn't for me because I was embarrassed to tell people what I do for a living. I didn't want to tell people that I was working on highway projects because I didn't want to encourage people to drive cars. And granted, I grew up in Missouri, so it wasn't like there was a ton of transit there. I grew up in a little college town. There was a bus system that I didn't understand. We certainly didn't have rail because we didn't have the population to support that. But at the end of the day, I was like, I got to do something else. And I thought that when I had the opportunity to move to Denver and work on a light rail project, I thought that was going to be it. And then I realized that, light rail was really just serving wealthy suburban communities and getting them to the center of town. So then when I started working on a bus project, a BRT project, I thought, oh, wow, this is really different. And it wasn't necessarily the BRT part of it, but just understanding bus as an important component of the transportation system. And of course, you all know that I'm, sort of leading the Better Bus program for Metro. And, we're getting ready to launch this. And it's when I think about who the bus serves and the fact that we are carrying today, 500,000 people on the bus. And in a pre-pandemic day, we would have carried 850,000 people on the bus. I think to myself, why aren't we investing more in our bus system every single year? Yeah, we put out a lot of revenue service hours and all that stuff, but what about the infrastructure that supports the bus trying to be more reliable and being faster and being comfortable for people? Like, those are the things that we need to make more investments in. And so I care very deeply about that. And so I'm just working really hard to get that done. But yeah, all those aha moments kind of led to where I am today.
I'll be quick and then we can go to Vanessa's question. So mine was a series, but it was also like one instance in Denver when I was working on the Eagle P3 East Corridor part of the project. I was just questioning why we were designing this light rail, commuter rail line that was like so far from this medical center. And I was like, people could use this if we were like maybe 4 blocks that way. And then same thing happened in San Diego. Midcoast Trolley is like in a trench and all the houses are up on the bluff. And I'm like, how are they going to get down here? And like, why is the train not up there? Or, you know, somehow like, you know, connected. So yeah, some multiple series moments.
Thanks, everyone. So we had a question from Vanessa. She was wondering if on tips you have to how to reach to policymakers to advocate for infrastructure projects, and then how we can promote these projects to the public.
So I would say to that, my discussion on governance. So, you know, make sure you're knocking on the right door is what I would say there. You know, sometimes, you know, like we see this in our office all the time. People start, you know, we get, you know, just input from the public, constituent requests all the time for the mayor. A lot of the times it's for stuff that he has absolutely no control over. So, you know, if you want to advocate, think about who's going to be in a position of decision-making power, and maybe who's not in a decision-making power, but who's going to support. And that's your group that you know, kind of need to rally and get together. It might be, you know, construction companies, you know, who they're going to be the people who do the hiring and the business side of actually building the things. They might be a really great lobbyist block, and that's probably where a lot of people work. You know, or if it's, you know, the right elected officials who sit on a committee in the House, you know, if they are in the committee that oversees the infrastructure bill, that's going to be the person that you want to lobby in order to say, hey, look, infrastructure is important for us for these reasons. At your local level, you know, at your city council level, it's going to be the decision makers who sit on that committee at council, or in the city of Los Angeles's case, we have a board of public works. So there's completely separate commissioners who oversee that. So, you know, that's what I would just say is like, make sure that you're advocating and directing in the right way so that your work can be effective, so that you're directing that effort in the best way to actually be heard and to be acted upon.
I'll just add to that actually, because I think it's really important, like Julia said, to kind of know who's making the decision. But the other thing that you have to do in order to cajole all the decision makers to support a project is you got to have a really good portfolio of case making. You know, why are you doing this project? Why do you care about this project? Why should they care about the project? Make sure that they understand that. And it's not just one single facet that matters. You know, some people are going to be, you know, they're going to say, if we build this project, you're going to have a whole bunch of, you know, labor that will, you know, a whole bunch of people who are going to get jobs. Or some people will say this will serve communities who are truly underserved today. So there could be so many reasons why that project is really important. And you have to be able to, you know, at a moment's notice, give that elevator speech about why that project's important and why they ought to care. So you have to remember to do that.
And yeah, and my quick answer would probably be work in community with folks on who is impacted by these projects. So like if you're just, for example, like interested on the Sepulveda Pass project, get to know the, you know, neighborhood groups that are and community groups that are, you know, going to be directly impacted, UCLA students or people who ride the the Orange Line. Things like, you know, community groups, and their LA Forward is an organization here in LA that I mentioned that I have developed like relationships with, and it's like an open tent kind of organization where you can, you know, bring some of this knowledge of what you know about ASCE's report card into spaces like that, and help sort of prioritize advocacy and just organize with folks, and then, you know, raise it to elected officials when it's the right time.
And I want to say one more thing about that, which is I always want to advocate for highway funds. You know, if we're talking about report card, you know, that report card always goes over like all of the bridges, all of the mega projects that we need to do. I always like to bring attention to the small stuff that nobody cares about, but actually matters, which is like paving streets. And what happens when you're paving streets? You got to stripe them. And when you stripe them, you can make a decision of, do you want to put that street back the way it was? Or do you want to put that street the way that you want it to be? And that's a decision that happens at the community level. And, it's not always at the top of people's minds, but if you want to get to a lot of what I think everybody on this panel has been saying about, like, let's build something that works for people, let's have a network of transportation where people can actually get to transit. If we're going to spend those billions of dollars on a train or, enhancing bus to be BRT, you still got to get there. And often that means city streets, and often that means retrofitting an existing street. And I think there's going to be a huge portfolio of work that all across the country, we are basically retrofitting our 20th century engineered streets that no longer serve our needs. We have all decided as a profession that we do not want to move cars as fast as possible because it's unsafe and it just contributes to traffic, right? We've all decided that people are the more important thing to move, not cars. So if you're moving people, we have a lot of ways that we know are more efficient and safer to move people than just, putting highways everywhere. So I would just say that too, is as people are thinking about maybe if it's your career or your activism or whatever, it's not always going to be the big projects that make all the big difference. Nadine is now working on Better Bus, which is basically a portfolio of a bunch of small projects. But overall, when you add them up all together, it makes your rider experience as a bus rider make sense. And suddenly you can cross the street and wait in shade for a bus that's on time. And all of those things take a bunch of small little projects rather than a big bridge or building, a tunnel or a light rail.
Thank you. And then I think we have one more question we can ask just before time wraps up. There's a question from Preeti and also a question from Vidi, kind of asking about the breaking point from going from engineering to policy, and then also kind of going from not being sure how to kind of transition or pivot from engineering to policy, and if anyone has any thoughts on trying to make that that pivot, and is it ever too late or too early?
I think one of the books I read that really framed like politics for me was Railtown by Ethan Elkind. He's a UCLA or maybe UC Berkeley law professor and also urban planner. And it really talks about how LA got to probably 2016, and then it stops because that's when Measure M and everything else picks up. And breaking point, I mentioned that previously, which is like, realizing that what I was doing was disconnected from communities. Should we answer that last one? What future projects are we excited about? I think a lot of the bus projects at Metro really excite me. So anything that could, as engineers, a lot of us are like into value, and like bus projects go a long way for the dollar spent. So that is really where I think I want to see a lot of work happen.
So I'll add to the question about how to make that jump from engineering to policy. I think the first thing is that I think you need to know what you stand for. And so it's never too early or too late to get involved in policy or governance or decision making, but you got to know why you're doing it, and you got to figure out what your value is, and be able to talk about your value, how you can contribute to finding answers and developing solutions for people. And then really, once you know what makes you tick, I think then you have the ability to curate your career path and find a way to shape the future in a way that's meaningful to you and meaningful to the community. And there are a lot of fits and starts along the way, but I think at the end of the day, when you look back at your career, you'll be like, oh, wow, how did I get here? And then you realize that you actually forged your own path by doing some homework and self-reflection so that you know what you're about. So I think that's something that we don't spend a lot of time doing. I certainly never got counseled on that sort of approach when I was younger, but I know that whenever I mentor younger people, particularly people who really want to make a difference, I ask them to sit down and maybe journal about things they care about. Notice what types of articles you're following in the newspaper, for example, or what kinds of things inspire you through the TED Talks that you're listening to. And then start, after you start writing things down, you can start identifying trends and patterns of the things that you're writing down and things that you're getting excited about. And that will help you understand who you are as a person and as a developing engineer. And then, once you figure that out, you will take off. You'll figure out everything else after that.
And I think to add to that, I would say building your network of people too, because I think when I graduated from undergrad, there wasn't like a lot of cohesiveness with my cohort in engineering school. And so I didn't necessarily have like peers that I was really close with in my profession until I went to grad school. And another way to become more literate in policy is to go the education route. But that's not always the answer, but that is an answer. It's very expensive, but it's effective. And one of the most valuable things that I got out of my master's degree was my network of people. There's 70 some odd planners that come out of UCLA every year. It's one of the largest cohorts in the country, or I think it's the largest. And that's how I figure things out. Like what Nadine is saying, of like, you have to figure out what's important to you. You have to just, define what your values are if you're going to work in the world of values and decision making. And having a network of people, both older and who are your peers, that you can rely upon to have those discussions and think things through, because it's not like it's a magic answer. You're not going to just like one day, it's not going to just appear to you, and it changes over time. But having the people that are both working alongside you and ahead of you in careers that you can bounce ideas off of, or just talk about stuff when you don't understand, that's been invaluable to me. And then exciting projects. I think we all have projects that we're excited about, but for me, I love to pound away on these bike highway projects where, the first one that's going to break ground, if nobody's heard of it yet, rail to rail, rail to river in South LA is going to be, when it's done, a 10-mile long bike highway, basically through South LA. The first section is about 6 miles long, and it's just going to be awesome and transformative. And eventually it'll connect to the river and be a part of this, what will eventually be, I think, it's going to be awesome. It's going to be amazing. And it's going to be something that Los Angeles can be proud of as a county when we're just going to have basically, tens of miles of completely separated bike highway all across the county. And the goal is to connect it all together, because a lot of it goes through communities where their primary mode of transportation is not a car today, even when we have really crappy infrastructure. So, what's going to happen when we have wonderful, infrastructure that makes you feel safe, and it might actually be something that people choose to do instead of something that you have to do. So that's something that I get excited about.
And for me, the project that I care about the most, as I've said before, and as Alfonso alluded, is the Better Bus program. $2.3 billion in 5 years. No, it's not funded yet, but it will be funded at some point. And it's, in my opinion, the most compelling investment that Metro could be making over the next 5 years. It has the ability to transform mobility for the 500,000 people a day who are riding now, and for the over 1 million who will ride in the future. And there's nothing that speaks louder than that.
Well, thank you all for answering questions. I'll hand it back to Martin now to close up the session.
Thanks, everybody. I just wanted to say, give a really big thanks to our panelists. I thought it was a really, really great discussion. If anybody would like to ask more questions or wants to, get in contact with the panelists, please let me know. I'm sure they'd be happy to chat, and I can definitely connect you. A couple of things before we end tonight. I wanted to quickly plug another webinar that we have on Thursday coming up. If anyone here is interested in even more policy, let me know if you could see my screen. I don't know if you could see it okay. but we have a webinar with the mayor of the city of West Hollywood, Lindsay Horvath. She's going to be talking about how she is trying to extend and advance the Crenshaw LAX Northern alignment through West Hollywood. So right now, the Crenshaw LAX line stops, I think, at the Expo line. Correct me if I'm wrong, anybody. And she would like to extend it. There's already a project in Measure M to extend it, and the city of West Hollywood wants to expedite that. So she's going to talk about the different things that the city is doing to do just that. So please join us. It's this Thursday at 6 p.m. if you're interested. Other than that, I wanted to take a quick picture with everybody for the ASCE LAYMF website. So if you're not camera shy, please do turn on your cameras, and at the count of 3, please say cheese. 1, 2, 3. Cheese.
Cheese.
Great. Let me take one more. 1, 2, 3. Cheese.
Cheese.
All right. So that wraps up our webinar. Thank you everybody again for attending, and thank you to all the panelists, Nadine, Alfonso, Julia, for all the insight you shared with us. I know everybody really got a lot out of it, and definitely looking forward to connecting with you in the future. So thank you everybody, and have a great night.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye all.
Thanks for having us. Good night.